Welcome. Our session today will focus on a practical question. Basically, what makes philanthropic dialogue with public authorities effective? And what does it take to build a supportive ecosystem for philanthropy? But before we start, I would like to understand, in the context of dialogue, who's in the room, basically. So if you can tell me, to start with, if you're from Belgium, if you can raise your hand. Ooh, okay. If you're rest of Europe? Okay, nice. Rest of the world? Oh, great, great, great. So now I have an idea of who I have in this room, which is, I think, important for dialogue. But I would like also to give you 1 minute to basically liaise with your neighbor in the room and ask and present yourself and ask him why or he has chosen this session. So you have 1 minute. Okay, okay. Unfortunately, I can't control the room anymore. Thank you. Thank you. Great. You feel the energy? You feel the energy, the power in the room? Great, great, great. That's the start of a dialogue, and a dialogue is also relationship building. So that's what we started. We will be able to continue later during lunch. But dialogue and relationship are basically at the basis of collaboration, and I think it matters because it helps us to create trust, to align resources, to allow us to avoid duplication, develop solutions together. Address not only immediate needs as a philanthropic sector, but also tackling long-term strategic and systemic challenges. So before we turn into sharing some national experience and getting into some discussions which could help us here in Belgium, we'll start by grounding ourselves in the wider European landscape and how basically the legal definition of our sector is important, how the sector recognition shape basically access to public authorities, and how the political climate and the regulatory pressures will influence basically the operating space in which we are active, and also why in this dialogue data and evidence are really often prerequisite for a meaningful consultation in that respect. So to introduce this European overview, which is based on a study that we launched earlier this year together with Philea, I'm delighted to welcome Hannah Surmats on stage. Well, Hannah. Okay, Hannah is head of policy at Philea, which is the European Association of Philanthropy. She has worked over 2 decades in this operating environment for foundations, institutional philanthropy in Europe. Her work is primarily based on monitoring the policy developments, analyzing legal and tax frameworks which are affecting the philanthropic sector, and also engaging with policymakers and stakeholders in order to enable the proper conditions for the sector. She has, in her role at Philea, been involved in multiple activities at European level, being part of the Financial Action Task Force, the Private Sector Consultative Forum, the OECD Tax Business Advisory Group, the European Commission Expert Group on Social Economy, the European Economic and Social Committee CSO Liaison Group, and I probably forgot a couple of other ones, including the Social Economic Europe Board. So, Hannah, I will leave the stage to you to present the study that we did together.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak here and engage in a dialogue with all of you. I read the other day in a newspaper that human beings talk less and less to one another. We use our tools, we use different tools. We also had COVID, so dialogue is not to be taken for granted. But it is so important because it is a human element, and it is also a key element of democracy. And that's why dialogue is so important now more than ever. Dialogue among civil society, including foundations and policymakers, is even guaranteed by a famous Article 11 of the Treaty of the EU. So we have a constitutional recognition that there needs to be dialogue between our sector and the policymakers. Institutions, policymakers, they have to maintain an open and transparent dialogue with us. We as Philea, we have our manifesto, and I cannot do a presentation without mentioning the manifesto, where we call also for more engagement of policymakers with our sector. And it has been a true pleasure, hence, to collaborate with the Belgian Federation of Philanthropic Foundations to review how does the dialogue currently work. And hence, we have embarked on a bit of a survey, and a report was written, is currently finalized. We consulted 8 countries. You see them here. So we talked to representatives of the sector, the national foundation and donors networks across Europe. And there is no surprise that you will understand. We talked to 8. And what have we found out? That there are 8 different solutions of how national dialogue is organized. So there is no common blueprint, but we could still identify some trends and developments. I want to thank here all of those who contributed already to the piece of research, and 2 of our interview partners will also be here later in the panel today. We started our interviews and our research with wanting to understand a little bit more what is the political context in which the dialogue between the philanthropy sector and the policymakers is shaping up. And here our partners, our interviewees, they all shared some concern with us. They shared concern about civic space being restricted, including also in occasions philanthropy space. So our space is also not to be taken for granted. We see more compliance put on our sector, more reporting requirements, also sometimes difficulties in accessing banking services. We also see that wealth inequality is discussed. We even see sometimes also our sector's legitimacy being questioned. In a couple of countries, we've also seen that media has played a role. There was one media scandal which then, in a way, ruined the reputation of the whole sector in the country. But we also heard lots of positive stories. We heard that there's a growing awareness by policymakers of our sector. We also heard that there's more willingness to collaborate, to engage with our sector. So we sensed, of course, there are public budget constraints, which make policymakers also look into our sector, but that's not the only reason. There is a genuine understanding of an important role that philanthropy can play, and there is also a genuine understanding that one can understand each other's roles better, but one can also collaborate in multi-stakeholder partnerships. Jean already referred to it. Looking at the landscape in Europe, when looking at dialogue structures, it is important to have a clear definition about the sector. This helps. This also distinguishes the sector from other wider, other family sectors like social economy, like civil society. It is important to have a clear understanding of who is the philanthropic sector in a given country. It's also important to know some data, statistics of the sector. And this is something where we still need a lot of homework to do to collect more data. The data collection can sometimes even be done in collaboration with public actors. We've seen that in a couple of countries being developed jointly. And what is also important is that there is a kind of a structural positioning of the philanthropy and foundation sector. clearly it was identified that the national networks of philanthropy and foundations play a crucial role developing the dialogue. They have it in their DNA, so to say, the national networks, to be representing the sector, the membership. They also have in their DNA to advocate for a good environment for philanthropy. And they see themselves, of course, best positioned to be a key partner in establishing a dialogue with policymakers at the national level. However, the national networks are, of course, having within their membership very large and powerful foundations who themselves also have direct links with policymakers. And they engage with policymakers, which is very good, in a lot of cases on issue-based entries. But these foundations, these strong members, can also play a role in advocating for a sector, for the sector as, and be also ambassadors for the sector and in this dialogue. Now, why? Why is a dialogue needed? What are the key topics to be discussed in these national dialogue structures? So from the countries we talked to, we observed that there are basically two groups of topics for the dialogue. The one is more related to a bit of a threat scenario, and a bit of challenges that the sector is facing, which is a strong motivation to engage in a dialogue. When you see that your government is restricting your space, is putting new reporting requirements, is potentially also extending their supervisory powers, that's a moment where you surely want to be in dialogue with your policymakers because you would like to defend the space. But it's not only this reactive space, it's also a proactive agenda. And that's in a way the second group of topics that we identified. So the dialogue is also important to call for good laws, to call for incentives, but also to provide for entry points for collaboration. Understand what are the public actors doing, what are the philanthropic actors doing, where can one create synergies? That's an important topic for dialogue as well. Of course, I have to mention the National Strategy for Philanthropy because Eilish will talk about it later, but one result of a dialogue was indeed the creation of a National Strategy for Philanthropy, and that was one of a milestone achieved there. Now, looking into structuring how the dialogue operates, we see that formal versus informal. We see that only in very few cases there is really a formal structure for the dialogue. Just recently, we saw that in Spain there was a dedicated council set up, or is still in the process of being set up, for organizing this dialogue. But this is one of the few countries. Otherwise, in all countries, the dialogue is organized in rather informal ways. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen regularly, but there is no formal legal structure of a council or organized structure for this. Here it can be meetings, of course, with the government, with parliamentary committees, but also contributing to consultations, which is also an important way of exercising dialogue. Here, this is a challenge for the dialogue of our sector. Whether we advocate for a dialogue only for philanthropy or whether we pair with the wider civil society and with the wider social economy. And the countries have approached in different ways, but in most of the cases, and I would echo that's probably the best approach, it should be a dual approach. Because for some of the issues, you can and should be advocating with a wider family. You have common agendas, common issues. So this is what makes the voice stronger. But then at the same time, there will be issues which are specific for philanthropy and foundations. And that's where you want to have a unique entry point. And this relates, of course, to the operating space, but it also relates to issues around partnering and collaboration. Some of the challenges, I can't address them all, but just to be aware that the dialogue we observe in the different countries sometimes, are only one-off dialogues. So it's only a one-off conversation and then there's no follow-up, which is a challenge. Then it's also sometimes a one-way street. So the feeling that you talk in one direction, but you're not receiving a reaction. And of course, if you engage with policymakers usually are elected, they change. So this is a discontinuation of the dialogue. So once you created one, how to ensure continuity in the long run? And that is a challenge. Now, looking maybe at some of the opportunities that we heard throughout the interviews, there is increased understanding of the philanthropy sector. There is increased interest to engage in a conversation, and there is even increased interest to collaborate. The impact such a dialogue had, the respondents of the interviews, they mentioned it's important for maintaining a good operating space for philanthropy, and it's important to better recognize the sector, and it's important even to advocate actively for a national strategy or similar positive recognition of it. So I'm aware that my time is up. I heard a buzzer beeping somewhere. So I will be very brief. I just wanted to mention some recommendations at the end to also kick us into the discussion. What are the key recommendations based on the interviews we had? And we will continue with more interviews in the future. It is important to organize the sector, to speak to collectively. So if you do not yet have a national network, make sure you establish one. I know in the Belgian case you have a very strong network, so that's good news. Then the second point, it's important to collect evidence and data. The policymakers need to know who they talk to and how important your sector is and how important your sector is contributing to the public good and to issues aligned. Third recommendation, be clear about what you want to achieve in the dialogue. It's not a dialogue for only talking. It's a dialogue with a certain direction. You want to address certain things, so be clear about that. Position philanthropy also as a potential partner towards the policymakers. It is needed that the public, philanthropy, private actor, they all come together and discuss. So philanthropy can be a key partner. Of course, important for you to monitor what's going on and be aware of where are policy developments which provide a hook, which provide an entry for this dialogue. Finally, of course, it is about what I said initially, people to people. It is about individuals. It's about talking, building relationships and building trust. And this is an important ingredient that has to be stressed. Whether or not you start with a very advanced formal structure, that is up for discussion. It might not always be the most effective to start with. But of course, it should be the desire to create more formal structures. Just in the very political situation we are in now, we cannot take our space for granted, and we cannot take our space for dialogue with the policymakers for granted. So it is better now. It's better to establish a good structure now. And of course, with that in mind, we should be resilient into the future. We need to prepare for scenarios of what is awaiting us. We do not know what the future brings. We were not anticipating certain crises we are seeing and experiencing now. So let us be also looking at the prospect of creating a dialogue in that context. And I thank you all, and I hand back to Jean.
Have a seat. Yeah, so we've just seen a quick overview of our study. We will publish it in the coming weeks, and we'll try also to cover other European countries so that we can effectively monitor that dialogue in the years to come. We've seen a little bit about the legal positioning, the political contingency in which we are, the importance of relationship, policy windows, which are also opportunities to start discussing, but the fact that it's a very long-term investment that we need to make in order to make it work. So, like I said in the early beginning, today it's more a practical question. So, what works, what doesn't work, are questions we would like to raise with our panel, and what could work in Belgium, knowing that we have basically some kind of greenfield in Belgium in order to address this in a proper way. May I now welcome the different panel members, which I invite to come on stage. So welcome, Eilish Murray. You are the CEO of Philanthropy Ireland. You participated also to this study. You are leading basically the Irish Philanthropic Federation in your country, where your work is basically to support donors and foundation and to strengthen the philanthropy in the broader Irish civil society also. You used also in a previous life to support and mentor also a portfolio social enterprise startups and investments. And you come to this panel with 30 years of experience and being the sector voice with a lot of knowledge exchange and policy-relevant work, which can help us in this panel. Thank you for being here. Ricardo Garcia is Secretary General of the Portuguese Foundation Center, also participated in this study. You are basically representing the Portuguese Foundation in this role, also supporting heavily coordination, visibility of the sector, engagement on policy and dialogue, where you had also a very good experience in discussing with the public authorities. Before that, you also have a very important operational background by being the Director of Operations of the Portuguese Red Cross. And next to Ricardo, I'm inviting also Michael Anseo, which is the chairman of Febelfin, and also the CEO of the largest bank in Belgium, as we can say. You have a very large banking experience, also a direct experience in dialogue with key public counterparts, particularly in the finance policy and the regulatory ecosystem. And what we would like also to understand is basically from another federation active in Belgium is how have you tackled basically the dialogue with the public authorities, so that we have also a look of out of the box, seeing what other sectors are doing. But first of all, let's start with a small introduction question. Is based on your respective experiences in that area, what would you pick as basically one determined element allowing that dialogue with the public authorities becomes more meaningful rather than symbolic, and let's say what that could look in practice? So we have a term in Belgium which says, how can we avoid that this becomes a praatbarak, but that it becomes effectively something effective. So praatbarak means a talking shop. I'm not sure the translators did it correctly. So Eilish, maybe start with you on that one.
Yeah, and I'm not sure.
Oh, you're saying there are microphones. If you can just put them.
I'm good at shouting,
Yeah.
so I wasn't sure if you could hear. I suppose what I would say is you find your first entry point, you find your first champion, you find your first person that you can have that conversation and that you can have that dialogue with. And then you grow that from there. So I was very struck even when Hannah was presenting her piece there about, sort of saying, having the structured dialogue. It certainly would have been our experience that, the structure is still developing. It's not there. It's informal dialogues in the first instance. And it's to build on those dialogues as you go forward. But what helps those dialogues is if you can find a common entry point, that this is about, for policymakers, they need to hear that philanthropy is trying to work with them, that it is trying to support them, that it is trying to complement what they're actually doing. And if you can actually illustrate what that looks like in real life, what does that mean? For us in the philanthropy space, we can use terminology that maybe is not necessarily going to land with policymakers in the way that they understand it. So, we talk a lot about data and evidence, but I think it's also important to talk about the stories of impact. Not that they're numbers, not that they're, kind of figures or whatever, but actually, for all of your policymakers, point to where philanthropy has made a difference in their life, maybe. We talk in Ireland about philanthropy has touched everybody, and it was one of the things that our former Prime Minister, former Taoiseach, pointed to at the first time that we spoke to him about the marriage equality campaign, that was an experience for him that he could relate to. Okay. So find the points that can be related to.
Ricardo, some example in Portugal, based on your experience in the...
Yes, of course. But first of all, thank you, Hannah, Philea, and Jean, and the King Baudouin Foundation for today here. It's my first time in Brussels, but I already had a waffle. Amazing. Don't worry. Well, yes, in order to be relevant, you have to produce relevance. That's the issue here for us. And to be aligned with the country's needs and priorities makes us relevant actor. So what Foundation Portugal do, we've been trying to do, is to align our missions and our activities with the country's goals and main necessities. All of us have a lot of challenges going on: education, health, demographic. And what we've done is, foundations are not rigid platforms, they are not rigid institutions, they have to adapt. We saw it today in the early morning. The world is changing. It would be a not so wise idea to also remain the same, so we also have to change. So flexibility, agility, but aiming to the country's needs and the population's needs makes us relevant, and that way, of course, whatever government, they want to be with a main actor, a stakeholder in the country's priorities.
Okay. So a relevant speech which will allow you to be much more in the practicality with your counterparts.
Yes.
What is your experience on that one from the financial sector and your experience with public authorities?
And the hot dog in the pond, if I may say so.
We put you in the middle.
Yeah,
here.
thank you. I feel comfortable. I think the element to avoid the talking is you have to agree to disagree as well. When you're in discussions with policymakers, at a certain moment, you will have a diverging opinion. And if you continue to insist on tackling diverging opinions, you will not make it to something which is constructive and that you lead on. So if you agree to disagree, that allows you to focus on the things where you can find middle ground and where you can make progress. And I think that makes you, positions you also from a mental view in a more mindset to ensure that you can make progress.
Okay. Fine. Hannah, you have those dialogue more at the European level. We know about the European institutions, probably a different dimension. How do you make it practical in terms of dialogue with that level of policymakers?
Yeah, I think the key point to highlight is even make it relevance, the sector relevance, but then link in a way issue-based entries where you can collaborate as a sector on social housing, on equality issues, on democracy, showcase what the sector does, but link this to the call for an enabling environment for the sector, because the sector can only operate if the policymakers also provide the right tools. So this combination of hooking not only a simple call for good regulation, but hook it to why it is important. That's the strategic point.
Talking about Europe, and let's continue with you. Is we haven't addressed basically the specific dialogue between philanthropy and EU policymakers. What's happening at European level, which could impact basically what we do here in our national countries, and which would potentially drive the way that we are acting on a local level?
Yeah,
because there's probably a lot of directive regulations, etc., that will impact us in one way or another at a certain moment in time.
Absolutely. And the way the dialogue has been organized so far, I mean, we do have the Economic and Social Committee. I do not know how many of you are aware of it, but that's in a way a committee which brings together other stakeholders into an EU policy body. And 1/3 of the members of the Economic and Social Committee also represent the third sector, different actors in it. And that's in a way a formal structure that has been existing. And in that formal structure, there is also a specific group for civil society organizations, a called liaison group, which has been also existing now for 20 years. But this has not been enough, so we've sensed there is need for a different dialogue also, a direct engagement also with the policymakers. And hence we've been advocating for more dialogue, both for the civil society organizations with the EU policymakers, as well as for the donor community and the philanthropy community. And there's good news, there's some real movement now. So end of last year, there was an EU civil society strategy published, and we're all very happy about that. And this civil society strategy comprises the creation of a dialogue platform for civil society and EU policymakers. So this is very important, huge step forward. And then in this strategy, there's also the announcement of a more structured dialogue between public and philanthropic donors. So basically our community and the public donors, to exactly review who's doing what, avoid duplication, be smarter also in terms of creating synergies. So these are huge steps, and we are very much looking forward to implement those. Then, of course, we've also had entry points through consultations. You mentioned it. EU law has huge impact on national law developments. So, of course, we need to consult with our membership. We need to contribute to those. Sometimes I echo the findings from the national level. It sometimes is a one-way street. You analyze, you contribute, and then you're not sure what the result will be. So what I find more useful is the creation of working groups also at the level of the EU. For example, on social economy, we have an expert group where member state representatives, sector representatives, they even discuss policy together. And this is the way forward, to also co-design, co-shape, and collect wider input into the policy making.
Okay. Now, the foundations, especially in our country, are probably going to consider that European regulation is a little bit, sorry for my Dutch, far from my bed show. But how can you? What are basically the European elements which are the most actionable and which will directly impact basically the support of national dialogue? Is how can we, as federation, rely on some of the European guidelines when we are going to discuss with public authorities and vice versa?
Okay, two short points on that. The first point, of course, if there will be a national a new EU-level platform for dialogue with civil society, that can serve potentially also at the model for national level. But here I'm more referring to how to better bridge EU level and national level. And that's really where we need to ensure that also at your national dialogues and in your national networks and meetings, you also give a voice to the European topics so that they don't come as a surprise. A lot of the legislation that is impacting our sector stems from the European level. And it needs to also be discussed at the national level. So this is something that we need to bridge better. Sometimes even the consequences of impact, unintended impact, comes through our members. We have a legal affairs committee at Philea, and sometimes our members bring us attention to something that is impacting on them. Most recently, also the meta ban of social adverts. How this is impacting also on individual organizations, foundations, and their France Générosité, one of the members, played a very active part in that alerting, but also bringing us together to talk to the EU policymakers, alerting national level and European level. So this is something that is absolutely important, and where we believe that also the national networks, being now member of Philea, they have a different entry point now, and we can better bridge that.
Okay. Now, if we move back to the national levels, Eilish, you've been working on that dialogue for multiple years. What were for you the two ingredients that enabled you in Ireland to move to a more structured dialogue, and how does it stick beyond just a single moment, beyond just a single regulatory change which was going to happen?
I think, thank you. I think in terms of your first point, it was finding a champion within a government department that was interested, committed, and prepared to take it forward. And I think it was taking that opportunity as well, you know, and running with it at the time, once that person was identified. I think in terms of kind of maintaining then the dialogue and keeping it going, I think I would say, first of all, that continues to be a work in progress. So, you know, going back to the thing about there always being challenges, you know, stuff ebbs and flows. You can get forward and then kind of a little bit stagnant before kind of moving again. But I think where the co-creation came in terms of kind of the policy and the development of the policy, where that was a collaborative piece, where there was co-creation on it, that then led to kind of continued conversations in more structured format.
Do I have to understand that the first thing that you built was the relationship compared to the other aspect, which is the policy case or the evidence base, and in which sequence came those two elements then?
The relationships are critical. The relationships are vital, because that's what will flow thereafter. Okay, fine. And Ricardo, in your case in Portugal, which were the two moves that most improved access and credibility towards the public authority, so that they effectively recognized you as
as a as a proper counterpart for the sector?
Well, Jean, in our situation, it's connected with a new study we just finished 2 days ago, and it's a question I'll put to the room. What's the percentage of Portuguese people that believe foundations are transparent? Do you have any idea? Any numbers? Go ahead, don't worry. 17? 30%. So when I saw the numbers today in the morning, I was jealous of the Belgium perception of foundations. And why is this important? Because it is the topic that we aim. So we built on compliance guidelines, transparency. We acknowledge that importance. And recently, 2 weeks ago, we went to the parliament with the different parties there. And it was a very constructive dialogue because we were on the same board. So we are advocates and ambassadors for transparency, for impact, for communication. And I think that's one of the most important factors in order to have that credibility, not just with the government or the country, but society.
Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how you built that visibility, but beyond just communication, which is sometimes just one way?
Well, I think Alice talked about it, and also Hannah. We do have ambassadors. We have champions of foundations. Every country has a couple of champions of foundations. And they moved from project-based to systemic-based. We had a meeting with the Ministry of Education, and they gave us 7 challenges for the country. For the country. Long-term challenges until 2032. So they acknowledge the sector as system-changing. So he moved the complete project, 1-year approach to grant-making to be more of a catalytical capital and patient capital. So I think that's also important, that we are focused on the long term.
Okay. And that really creates basically traction to have that more long-term vision with your public counterparts, so
Correct.
that you're working together on those objectives?
And it has been created a small group from the government to induce best practice from foundations into policies, which is our goal. None of us wants to work on projects that disappear after 1 year. We want to work on seed projects that evolve, that construct, and hopefully they are adapted by the country, by the government into policies, effective policies that have impact in each other's lives.
Okay. Now, I mean, those dialogue situations are not always a very easy way to go. What do you see as most common blocking elements or the aspect of fragmentation, potentially, timing, lack of recognition? How do you experience that? Maybe, Michael, in your own discussions with the public authorities, what does block and makes you the fact that you do 2 steps in front and one back?
I think what is very important, I think you referred to it, Hannah, is to have the structure from a dialogue perspective. So that's what we try to implement in a very structural way with the parties that, as a financial sector, we interact with. Of course, and we refer to it, we come into ground where we, by definition, will have different views and different opinions. So I think as well, and it came also in the study, is when you're a federation, in a federation, you have multiple type of organizations and foundations that are member of a federation, whom by definition will have on themselves a different view or a different way forward. And so one of the things that you have to do as a federation, it's not look for what you have in common, because if you only will focus on what you have in common, you might have a very, very small basis that you can defend and what you discuss upon. And if you do that, at that moment, you miss out on all the opportunities. So that's something where if you really limit yourself as a federation, on what is the common denominator between all the foundations or all the members of the federation, then you miss out on all the opportunities. So what you need to do is you need to break ground, and you need to acknowledge as well that there are things that you can do together and things where you have to complement together. And if you don't accept that you have a wider ground to play, which maybe not everybody will be on that ground, is something that will hamper you to make progress.
Thanks. If based on your experience here, both at European financial sector, Portuguese or Irish experience, if there is just one feature that we should copy in year one, because I hate reinventing the wheel. So if there is one thing which says this should work, what would that be? On which element should we concentrate in year one? I think some of you have already mentioned some importance, but it may be interesting to recap on that one. The first step that we should take, because in Belgium we don't have any structure from dialogue, which is primarily based on informal relationship at these days. We don't have a structure, but what would be the first step, knowing that's going to be a long journey?
I think just building on where you mentioned, if it's just the areas of commonality, building a little bit on that, it's to talk the broader kind of space first, but also you do need a cohesive voice. And I do think that this is where, the national associations can come into play and be that voice of cohesion. But it is critically important as well, any of the member organisations, the foundations, etc., they also have their voice, and that's equally important. But I think certainly for us, for government, they needed to have one, touchstone that they could actually identify with. So build that and build that cohesion, and bring all of the stakeholders in, because you don't know what it is that you don't know until there is that dialogue there as well.
Okay. Someone else wants to comment on step one for us?
Just looking at the experiences also in the different countries, it appeared that I agree and disagree with your point, because I think still it is important to have a common vision and to have a common agreement of key asks and to have a common vision of what you want to formulate, because that gives you also credibility, because you are entering in a dialogue with a certain agenda, so to say. It may very well be that you have side agendas which are not relevant to all your members, but ideally you would have a kind of common voice that you can present. And this common voice building, or the agenda building, is also something where you build constituency within your sector, but you can even at this stage consider inviting policymakers to the table. When you want to discuss a better tax framework or a better a legal framework, or reduce some reporting requirements, or reduce the approach of supervisory authorities, why not bring them around the table and have some informal discussions with them? With informal discussions, you can then build relationships which will be very valuable. And by bringing them on board at an early stage, you also avoid to immediately be very confrontational with your asks, because you have in a way tested the ground a little bit of how they flow. So that would be more informal conversations to have, but it can build you co-shape your agenda and your key asks in a way that they are better receptive towards the policymakers, and you feel that they are also, in a way, potentially a little bit co-owned.
Okay.
Just picking up on Hannah, we do invite government members to all we do. So they go to webinars, they go to workshops, conferences, seminars, and we have recently approved a lobby law in Portugal. I was talking to Eilish and she was saying, well, we advocate, we do not lobby. I myself, I'm putting in my LinkedIn profile, philanthropy activist. It sounds cooler, fresher. But I think it's important to involve them, because then they're part of the conversation. And something that the Secretary of State taught me not too long ago is, if you want something done, first it starts with a coffee. So you invite someone for coffee and say, you know what, I'm thinking about doing something like this. So they feel like they're part of the beginning of the conversation. They're not in the end term of it. And that's what they do with every syndicate. First they have a coffee. And then we'll talk later about different things. So involve them in the beginning so they are part of the building process.
Okay.
I think if I can continue what you were saying, but then again it's from the financial sector, when you look at your counterparts, the policymakers, you see that sometimes they do not have enough time to really go deeper into the content. So in the past, they were backed by studies, by think tanks, and this is something that you feel that sometimes is missing. So if you can provide as a foundation additional content without asking anything, but giving information, giving background information, doing an educational track on bringing people up to speed, and give them knowledge that helps them also in other in other areas, in other files. This is something that really allows you as well to build that relationship, and I think it's quite important. So with the knowledge that you have as a foundation, you have an advantage because you can go much deeper, and they have a zillion things on their plate, they have a zillion priorities, and so they don't have time to go deep into things anymore. So by providing them, being a think tank for them and helping them in their job, if I may say so, is also something that allows you to create that interaction, that relationship.
And that's typically something at Febelfin that you are doing from a proactive point of view. You see it coming, or are you just more also receiving requests from the public authorities by saying, "Can you think about this and this with us, or do you have data on this, etc., which could support our case?" Because sometimes you would potentially be in a not the same objectives. Let's put it that way.
Most of the time, that's where you're not in the same. That's where you are. So that's the playing ground that you're at. So, well, I think what's important is what we try to do is, and you refer to it as well in the study, policymakers change.
Yeah.
And so then you have an election, and then you have new programs, and so the moment that what we do each time when you have policymakers changing is that we invite everyone who is new on the block to explain what you do, to see what they want to know, to see what questions they have, to see how we can fill in their gaps, and really a little bit even say, okay, if you need information, if you need data, if you want background, come and talk to us. And also keep, I think that's very important, as they change regularly, they also come back regularly. So it's not because in a certain government you don't have them anymore that you should say, I'm not going to talk to these people for, I don't know how long your governments are, 3, 4 years, 2 years, 1 year, before they come back, and then you have the same people back around the table. So you keep that relationship going as well. Mm-hmm. It's really investing in sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, okay. Eilish.
Just a small point, and just picking up that I do think, for any of our policymakers, there are huge demands being made in all of them on their time, on what people expect, to be achieved or whatever. So I do think sometimes kind of coming with the solutions, so being proactive, I think is important as well. And you can do that if you're listening. So those informal coffees, those building the relationships, you can hear what are the challenges for them. So, you can often then kind of give that example of where philanthropy can be a support in that respect.
Okay, great. We discussed a couple of touch points with the public authorities, based on directly from the federation, based on potentially directly from some foundations, in your case probably from some banks directly. We also discussed the fact that for some cases we need to see it broader, though typically we maybe need to go with common objectives and common ideas with other players of civil society and be part of that coalition. What would you do through one way or another? So what would be specifically something where you say, this is probably better for the federation to do, this is probably better for doing and addressing in a more global coalition, and this is maybe, I go solo, or I'm asking one specific foundation to go and spearhead the discussion. So what is your experience on that, and how do you strategically decide to go in one way or another?
Well, it depends on the subject. In Portugal, it was created a group that was created to change the legal framework for foundations. And they even talked to Hannah and to Stefan from Denmark. So we acknowledge the importance of being part of something bigger than Portugal. Now, that being said, if we see about the legal framework of Europe, they're all different. Even in Portugal, we have the second biggest patrimony initial capital of Europe. It's 7 times bigger than Spain. Spain is 4 times bigger than Portugal. So it depends on the subject. But we do believe there's value in ensemble. We believe that's where the data is bigger, where we show relevance to. But every foundation that works with us, they know it's better to be part of something bigger because it gives them more credibility and more impact in society. Even now, we had a storm in Portugal affected a region called Leiria. It has 6 billion euros in costs, and several dozen people died. And the foundations did not act alone. They were, hey, we need the center to act together, so we don't overlap, we don't overcommit, and so now we have around 50 million euros already compromised for those territories.
Okay. Anyone would want to add something? Yeah.
Just to add one point on the fact that policymakers need to know the foundation and philanthropy sector. And how can you explain this better by not bringing your members along? So in a way, when the new EU policymakers came into place, we also organized with our members some visits to the new MEPs to discuss with them, but always to also bring the foundations from their country along, at least one or two, because then that makes it more plausible. It links to them. It's a story that it's told. It's more meaningful. And then also what Eilish, I think you referred to, find a connection with the policymakers you talk to. They will surely all be active in a soccer club or in somehow in a foundation or in an association. So link it, make it relevant for them why this sector as an additional actor to public and private actors is so important. So that's a recommendation.
Okay.
Maybe on when you look at the Belgian Federation for banks at that moment, I think one of the key elements is we have a 90% plus representation. That means that as a counterparty, you know that you really talk to the whole sector. And I think having that very large representation is a key element for a foundation to have. It also comes, of course, with the downside, that if you have a very large representation, you have very big banks, you have very small banks, and we have different point of views.
Okay.
So we have different positions, and sometimes that means that we try to reinforce. So when you meet as an individual party, a policymaker, you take also the points of the federation with you. When you meet as a federation, you only take the points of the federation. So, but it's important that each members, in their context, strengthen the message of the federation. It also means that sometimes, and I'm not sure that it's the case for in your kind of industry, if I may say so. Sometimes you see that policymakers try to break up the federation by selecting policies that are positive for one group, but not positive for another group. At that moment, you just have to swallow and think of the federation and continue.
Okay.
And that's something, and I hope it does not happen to you, but that's something which is, I think at that moment, the strength of a federation is really tested.
Yeah. So representativity is an important matter. So if there are some foundations which are not yet member of our federation, I do a call here in that respect. We have discussed a lot about outside of the fence, if I can say so, although there should not be a fence in dialogue. What I would like now to do is to look at the public authority lens and look at what makes dialogue valuable for and legitimate from a government side, because dialogue is you need two to tango. Let's put it that way. So in that context, I would like to invite Minister President Elisabeth de Gries, which is Minister President of the Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles. She holds responsibilities including budget, higher education, culture, international relationship, and relationship within the French world. She brings experience in public authority for more than 20 years now, if I can look at that when you start your career. And I think she can definitely explain her view on those elements. So, Madame la Vice-Présidente, je vous invite à nous rejoindre ici.
Voilà, bonjour à chacune et à chacun. Mesdames et messieurs, je voulais évidemment avant toute chose remercier l'ensemble des panélistes qui viennent de prendre la parole afin de nous exposer leurs différentes réalités nationales d'Irlande au Portugal. Quel que soit le pays, la philanthropie est une réalité et même une nécessité. Mais la complexité belge peut sans doute parfois compliquer un petit peu la donne et le nombre d'interlocuteurs. C'est donc effectivement comme ministre de la Culture que je m'exprimerai devant vous aujourd'hui. La culture et la création sont essentielles à nos sociétés. Elles jouent un rôle majeur, et ce, dès le plus jeune âge, notamment en stimulant la créativité et l'esprit critique. La culture constitue également un espace d'expression et de liberté où les individus peuvent partager leurs idées, questionner la société, encourager le débat. Enfin, la culture favorise le dialogue entre les cultures. Vous l'aviez dit tout à l'heure, on parle au travers de nos téléphones. La culture favorise le dialogue entre les hommes, c'est très important et ça résonne évidemment particulièrement face aux crises mondiales actuelles. Mais n'oublions pas aussi qu'elle est pourvoyeuse de richesses et d'emplois. La culture est une réelle économie. Elle représente aujourd'hui en Belgique 5% du PIB et des dizaines de milliers d'emplois. Voilà pourquoi le financement public de la culture est capital et il ne doit pas être remis en question. Mais ces moyens publics ne suffisent pas, il est donc essentiel d'encourager le privé à investir plus, car investir dans la culture et dans la création, c'est aider à propager le beau et à faire rêver. Je retiens de vos différents témoignages et de votre étude d'abord le besoin d'un dialogue renforcé entre décideurs politiques et le secteur de la philanthropie. Je retiens l'importance d'une vision partagée. Je retiens la nécessité d'objectivation, de statistiques, de chiffres. Je retiens le besoin de transparence réciproque entre les fondations et les pouvoirs publics. Et je voudrais insister aussi sur les spécificités de la Belgique, puisque ces citoyennes et ces citoyens sont reconnus pour leur générosité et leur engagement. Les chiffres relatifs aux dons le confirment. Comme le souligne très justement la Fondation Rabaudouin dans son baromètre de la philanthropie, 8 Belges sur 10 sont convaincus que faire un don contribue à un monde meilleur. L'année dernière, 60% des Belges déclarent avoir fait un don. Ces chiffres ne font que confirmer cette sensibilité forte. Même si, soyons clairs, la question de la déductibilité fiscale des dons vit, c'est un fait. Dans un contexte économique que nous vivons et qui est très compliqué, c'est une réalité, mais cela ne doit pas empêcher les gouvernements que nous sommes de travailler aux conditions qui facilitent la philanthropie. Et en l'occurrence, le gouvernement de la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles s'est engagé dans le cadre de sa feuille de route 2024-2029. Après, nous serons remplacés, effectivement. Nous nous sommes engagés à promouvoir de nouvelles sources de financement, notamment le mécénat et le financement participatif pour le domaine de la création artistique. Et dans le cadre de ces réflexions qui sont en cours, nous avons la chance de pouvoir nous appuyer sur des expertises, comme celle de l'Observatoire des politiques culturelles au sein de la Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, mais aussi de structures comme Prométhéa, qui vient d'ailleurs de publier une enquête relative au mécénat d'entreprise en Belgique. Ces différentes réflexions, comme celle évidemment de la Fondation Rabaudouin et vos partages d'expériences d'aujourd'hui, sont essentielles pour nous guider. Je suis convaincue, comme vous, que la philanthropie est intimement liée à des actions qui font sens. La culture ne fait évidemment pas exception, tout au contraire. J'ai entendu votre appel, celui de nous rencontrer pour pousser plus loin la réflexion. Nous avons besoin de vous pour avancer dans notre volonté d'ouvrir de nouvelles perspectives de financement pour la culture en Belgique francophone. Le politique seul ne peut avancer. Commençons par de l'informel. Focusons sur ce qu'on peut faire ensemble plutôt que sur nos désaccords pour atteindre nos objectifs. Je vous tends la main, rencontrons-nous. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Merci Madame la Ministre Présidente d'avoir pris le temps de venir vous joindre à notre panel et d'être présente dans ce contexte-là. Je voudrais profiter de l'occasion que vous soyez tous là pour laisser la parole également au public. And so the idea would be to allow you also in the context of a dialogue to ask some of questions that you may have to the panel. So
my name is Max von Abendroth. I work amongst others also for TPI, the Partnering Initiative, and I would like to ask the panel a question on one element that Hannah brought up in the beginning, which was referring to public-private philanthropy partnerships, so bringing the three together around a specific topic like social housing or health or education or climate. And my question is on two levels. What is the role of an association like that you are representing in kind of helping foundations to find their way into these partnerships? And how do you see the skill set in foundations to be ready for taking on these kind of partnerships? And yeah.
Thank you so much for the question and comment. Indeed, there are societal issues that require different stakeholders to come on board, and foundations have already in the past collaborated with public actors, with businesses on occasions, but it's been on an ad hoc basis. Not often very systematic analysis has been done. So we have also together, with TPI and with other partners, started to work on analyzing how these partnerships work, what is the unique role that philanthropy brings to the table, and what are potential challenges and opportunities, and what are potentially key points to ponder even before you enter into such a partnership. Because these are also different cultural backgrounds of the business sector, the public sector, and the third sector, the philanthropy sector. And one needs to understand and prepare for entering into such multi-stakeholder partnerships, so to say. But we see that there's more peer exchange needed and more kind of building and preparing this sector. So that's why also we have embarked on this, and we know that our global partner is also on board to review also from the global level how to make the best out of these partnerships, how to be smarter when engaging and use the most potential of them. Thank you.
One really fast point would be that in Portugal we have a social innovation program. It's public-private, and that is the entry point to a lot of institutions. We've had around 10 million euros in projects from foundations and the government towards education, inclusion, employment. So that's already an entry level and a channel to do that in an organic way. It's been for 10 years, so it's raised 60 million euros from the sector with the public authorities.
You want to comment, Alice?
Yeah, it was just to say that, yes, in Ireland also there's a social innovation fund that was established that's match funding. I think the larger public-private partnership initiatives, one or two were tried in Ireland at different stages, but for various reasons they didn't proceed. So I think the larger, more kind of systemic issues that need to be addressed certainly are more challenging, and I would take on board, what Hannah was saying in terms of preparation and preparing the ground for those as well.
If I just may add from a private perspective on that one, and then we'll close it then. We have a public-private partnership on the Belgian market, which is called Digit All, and it's really the only thing, the focus on digital inclusion. And so we bring together all, I think it's more than 70 or 80 private companies that have signed the charter. And based on that, it's not just about giving money, it's on what a company will commit to do within their own activities to ensure that these elements can be promoted. Then we also work together, I think, with all the governments. We have multiple governments in Belgium, as you know, so we work with all the governments together. And this is something, and I want to just make the point, for me it's not only about money when you discuss a public-private partnership, it's also if you can work on smart ways to ensure that private companies can make specific commitments to reach a specific goal. And that's another way of looking into it.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Leander Barrington-Leach. I'm the Executive Director of the Five Rights Foundation. We're an international NGO working on children's rights in the digital environment. And I think my question follows pretty well on what you've just been saying, because I'd like to ask you about how to bring philanthropy into existing dialogue, especially in fast-moving environments such as technology, where I think the policy and the political landscape and dialogue is moving a lot faster than philanthropy is keeping up. So there are very established dialogues and very rich dialogues that are happening, but philanthropy is not part of this. So I'd like to know how can, in such situations, philanthropy be brought in to existing dialogues? Thank you.
I think it's about creating the awareness of those dialogues taking place and inviting philanthropy into it. Quite often we would kind of find that things can happen in silos, and that's never good in a space. The give has to be as good as the ask. Both, everybody is working on this together. So I think creating that awareness of where the dialogues are taking place, what is actually happening, and how philanthropy can be a part of that conversation, I think it is then kind of creates space for them to be a part of it as well. And I think absolutely stuff is moving so rapidly, it is difficult to always be abreast of kind of what is happening and what that change is continuing to look like.
Well, I'm going to talk about Philea, because we're working on futures philanthropy. So we're really working on foresight and embedding foresight in the existing structure. So always spotting signals and trends. But one thing that I do not agree is that the foundations are always analyzing and discussing and debating. If we do have a great foundation that works on digital literacy and technology, digital inclusion. If we find that initiative prone to more institutions, we create an initiative where we put people joining that debate and joining that initiative. I think that's something of the great work we've been doing, is to acknowledge a champion, a cause that is transversal, and to convey people, funds, resources, but also missions into that particular mission, and then scale it, which is very important.
Yeah, no, just to add, of course, that these are very important developments, revolutionary developments, which impact on all of us. And it is true that our sector, as any other, is impacted by it, so needs to be around the table. And the foundation sector is also discussing how it can contribute to solutions, also of different ownership structures, different ideas, think tank perspectives of how to kind of face the challenges of the future and how to make best use of opportunities, but also address certain challenges around the AI and digital revolution. So yes, I think we are part of some conversations. We may surely not be part of all, but if you sense there is someone lacking or missing in a certain dialogue, don't hesitate also to reach out afterwards. And of course, we do have members who are very interested in certain topical issues, and they might be in some of the conversations, but not in all. And if you sense that their foundations or philanthropic representatives should be part of some dialogues that they are not in as yet, do let us know. Thank you.
I think there's a question over there.
Yes. Maximilian Martin, I'm a board member of Swiss Foundations, Association of Grant-making Foundations in Switzerland. So we are lucky to have, I think, a very good relationship with government in general. But I have a question to the minister in particular and maybe the wider panel. I mean, the fundamental challenge is typically time. I never see a lack of goodwill or interest, but I see a lack of time. So, you know, when you actually look for information from the foundation sector, what formats work really well for you? Because at the end of the day, you know, effort, time is finite. We have all tons of things on our agenda. We want to be to the point. We could give you tens of thousands of data points. What is the most relevant? Do you have any advice on that?
Merci. Ça a été dit tout à l'heure aussi qu'on n'avait pas beaucoup de temps et qu'on n'avait pas le temps d'aller dans le fond des choses. Je pense qu'un acteur qui est peut-être pas suffisamment identifié dans le dialogue, c'est les administrations, qui sont aussi en fait le gain de la stabilité et de la continuité. Puisque c'est vrai que nous, on change, qu'on n'a pas le temps, objectivement, puisque vous avez vu, je suis arrivée en retard et je repars. C'est le cas de monsieur Yambon aussi ce matin. Je pense que l'enjeu, c'est qu'on puisse être alerté ou qu'on puisse identifier ensemble, ça a été dit tout à l'heure aussi par le collègue du Portugal, sur les objectifs partagés. Je pense que ça, c'est vraiment l'essentiel sur ce sur quoi on doit se mettre d'accord, c'est qu'est-ce qu'on veut atteindre comme objectif, quelles sont nos priorités. Et puis sur le comment, ça doit sans doute se travailler en partie en dehors du politique et plus avec les administrations. Parce que je pense que ce sont des choses qui s'inscrivent dans un temps moyennement long. Alors on voudrait qu'ils soient plus rapides, mais en fait dans la réalité des faits, c'est souvent du temps qui est moyen ou qui est long. Et là, c'est les administrations qui sont sans doute les meilleurs partenaires. Donc je pense qu'on doit servir à donner l'impulsion politique, identifier la volonté, clarifier les objectifs partagés. Et puis le travail sur le comment doit se faire avec les administrations qui sont nos partenaires directs et qui, elles, identifient la continuité sur le moyen et long terme.
Just to add one point on this, because we also experience now that at the level of the European Commission, there is now a lot of more interest in the foundation sector to know more on who's doing what. So there's been really reach out, and they also want often very targeted information or are eager to understand in whatever social housing or different societal issues where you have a common agenda potentially to understand better which are the actors and which expertise/other resources come around the table. So I think that's where it needs to be targeted towards the policy areas where you want to engage in a dialogue on. And I think that's where, of course, there is information flooding. But my experience is also, if you are trying to be to the point, that is helpful. Because the policymakers and the administrations, they do not have a lot of time. They cannot read 200-page contributions. So be to the point, and that of course helps.
Hello, thank you. I'm Philippe Seidel. I'm from Age Platform Europe. We are a network of organizations of and for older persons. And so thank you for all these insights. And thank you for highlighting the liaison group at the ESC, Hannah. my question is more, because we're talking about dialogue between foundations and governments, but there's a third element, third partner, which is the communities which philanthropy serves. And there's a different relationship. Obviously, they should speak for themselves, but they're usually served by philanthropy because they are not really organized, not capable of speaking for themselves, or not empowered to speak for themselves. So my question is, in terms of your dialogue as foundations with policymakers, how you could reinforce the voice of the people you serve, of the communities you serve, to also reinforce your own voice, because you're natural partners or associates with them, but at the same, because it's a balancing act, at the same time leaving a space for them to express themselves.
Just to say, I think you're absolutely right in terms of the communities that philanthropy serve need to be part of the dialogue, and that was very much recognised at the outset. The representative organisations for the not-for-profits in our own country, you know, such as Charities Institute Ireland, etc., were brought to the table as part of the dialogue and the consultation for the development of the policy, and they continue to sit on a number of the working groups, because it is a two-way, it's two-way dialogue that has to be there, and it's also for foundations to understand the challenges that are for beneficiaries as well. You know, so I think bringing them into the conversation at a very early stage, it's a three-legged stool, you know, and it has to operate in that way.
Well, I guess two steps. First of all, there are the community foundations, and community foundations act with communities, and I think they are a reliable, trusted partner in terms of getting what the communities need and population need into that dialogue. But also in Portugal, we are part of the Confederation of Social Economy. So it's not just foundations. We work with sometimes of the beneficiaries that we work to with grant making, but we are part of a larger picture, and so we discuss social economy policies in the national, but also in European level.
Yeah, no, I think this is a very important point. Absolutely, as the other speakers have also said, that foundations are also part of civil society, but they're also supporting civil society. They are also part of social economy, but they're also supporting other social economy actors. So they always have a bit of a dual entry into this. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be part of this dialogue, because that's very important to have the social economy dialogue and the civil society dialogue. But there is this moment also of having a kind of unique philanthropy engagement, but a fully sense that yes, civil society perspectives, social economy perspectives needs to be part of that. So it should not be an isolated dialogue, because foundations don't work in isolation. So there needs to be a cross-reference and an inclusion part around that dialogue as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like now to close and to wrap up these sessions, where I think we have three key takeaways based on the discussions that we had. This relationship. I'll put that as one takeaway. Make that clear. Be relevant, if I understand it correctly. Be relevant also with appropriate data evidences, so that you can come up to the public counterpart to help them also on our joint objectives in that respect. And also be conscious of time. It takes time to get this done. And I would like also to, in this context, remercier Madame la Ministre-Présidente du temps qu'elle a bien voulu nous consacrer dans ce contexte-là. So, please, a warm applause for the panel.